I'm thankful for everyone's presence this afternoon, and I'm happy to get to study the Bible with you again. I sent an email a few weeks ago, but sometimes emails get lost, especially with as many as I might send out on the VP members. So yes, I am self-aware that I send frequent emails. But this was our time set aside for a deacon ordination. But some had inquired about it, so I thought it might be nice to begin by just telling the group that we're delaying that. And so look for an email sometime in the future about when we'll get back on track. And this afternoon we're going to study from the book of 1 Samuel chapter 1. And I invite you to turn in your Bibles, because that's where we're going to stay for the entirety of our sermon. And so I challenge you to read along with me. Now, this title, The Dedication of a Child, I hope that we will leave the study with a better appreciation of what it means to dedicate. But I'd like to begin, I can't help it just because the visual that I see on the front row is I look from one side to the other and I see the dedication of children kind of in the middle and then at the end. And I don't know all of you maybe as well as some others, but many of you are at the end or very close to being that end of that dedication time where your parents, your family have dedicated you to the Lord for the past 18 years. And now it's time for you to move on to being that dedicated servant. On this side over here, you're in the middle of being dedicated. And so your parents are actively dedicating you. And that goes for everyone else that's not on the front row. Don't think just because you're not up here that you don't get that blessing. This is just what I'm visually seeing, a great contrast on this front row. I hope by the end that we will appreciate that dedication just a little bit more than maybe we did when we began. So in 1 Samuel chapter 1, you might think that this is going to begin with Samuel, but it has to start with his parents. Because for us to appreciate who Samuel is and what his place is in Bible history, then we need to understand Elkanah and Hannah, his mom and dad. Now, on the single image that I have, I'm going to go ahead and unhighlight it. There will be 5 sections that we'll be reading from and commenting on. And the main character of our Bible study is Samuel's mother. Her name is Hannah. Hannah is a superheroine of the Bible. She's only in this section. She doesn't get mentioned in the Hall of Faith in Hebrews chapter 11. She's not in the genealogy of Jesus in Matthew chapter 1. This is it. And yet, if it wasn't for what Hannah did, then we wouldn't find the transition from judge to king in Israel. Now that transition, if you're familiar with Old Testament history, was necessary. A lot of times we look at it like the kings of Israel were all bad, and if they'd just obeyed the Lord, then it would have been great. But in the law of Moses, it talked about how a king would come. And that was always God's plan. So here we have a mother who is going to help the last prophet ordain the first king. So there's her place in the narrative. If it wasn't for her, then he wouldn't have been able to do his job. But she has a problem, and that's where we'll begin, is in 1 Samuel chapter 1, verse 1. It says, "Now there was a certain man of Ramathaim Zophim of the mountains of Ephraim, and his name was Elkanah, the son of Jehoram, the son of Elihu, the son of Tohu, the son of Zuph, an Ephraimite." You stay with me? There's a lot of very challenging names in that section. But you need to know a couple of things about Elkanah. Number one, he's a Levite. So he's one of the special people that gets to go minister to the temple every now and then. He's also an Ephraimite, meaning that's where he lives. So in the same way that I am an Oklahoman and also a Texan, in the same way where I'm both, he's both, right? And so he's from a special tribe, but he's also from this region specific. And he had 2 wives, verse 2. The name of one was Hannah, and the name of the other was Peninnah, or Peninnah. I'm not even sure how you pronounce it in Hebrew. And so he's got 2 wives. And every time in the Old Testament that you hear about one of the Bible characters having multiple wives, it never ends well. You know, God's plan from the Garden of Eden was that there would be a man, there would be a woman, and that together that they would have a family. Now, they could let that family grow with children, but their family's complete with the man and his wife. But you look at Abraham and Sarah couldn't have kids, and so she has this scheme for Abraham to have kids through Haggai. And you know what? It didn't work out as well as they thought it did. And the same is true at so many other times. Even King David has multiple wives, so many sons, and his sons end up trying to overthrow him in civil war. Well, this follows that same pattern. Now, scholars believe that Hannah was the first wife. And Elkanah is a religious man. We'll see that in this reading, that he was a good man. And it seems like that he would have been content with Hannah if she could have children. But she couldn't. She was infertile. And so, because she couldn't have kids, he marries Peninnah so that he can have offspring. Now, he loves Hannah more because the Bible says in this section, whenever they would go to the feast, he would always give Hannah more food. And so that was kind of a way to show who he preferred. But yet Peninnah was the one who was able to have kids, and so there was a very contentious relationship where she would just rub it in Hannah's face. Look at all these kids I can have, and you can't have any. Now, we live in a postmodern, egalitarian culture where men and women are equal in so many ways that back in these days they didn't have. But I will tell you, even in our culture today, and I know we have experience even in our congregation, to not be able to have children, to struggle to have kids, to lose kids, is an emotional experience unlike any other. And it's very hard to overcome that loss, the lack of dignity that's associated with it. It's challenging. So several of us can put ourselves in Hannah's shoes. She's got a problem. She can't have children. Now the Bible says in verse 5, talking about the food, but to Hannah he would give a double portion, for he loved Hannah, although the Lord had closed her womb. And her rival also provoked her severely to make her miserable because the Lord had closed her womb. And so it was, year by year, when she went up to the house of the Lord, that she provoked her. Therefore Hannah wept and did not eat. You know, I've used her. I used her in the example whenever we got together and talked about depression. And so I'd like to say this about Hannah. We don't know if Hannah was depressed, but she certainly has symptoms that go along with what depression is. She's not able to eat. She's constantly in tears. She's bitter in spirit, etc. However, I would make this observation. A lot of times depression is not manifest in sadness. And depressed people can appear to be happy, to have their life together, and it seems to be normal, but behind closed doors, that's whenever it might manifest itself. So as we look for people who may need help, let's not only look at those who are physically sad in your presence, but look for the ones who are also always happy and maybe wearing a mask. So keep that in mind. But I do think Hannah is in deep sorrow. Look at verse 10. It says, she was in bitterness of soul and prayed to the Lord and wept in anguish. So I want to share this final thought about Hannah before we move into her petition. And that is, she never stopped trusting in God. Even when she wept, even in her bitterness, even in her inability to eat, she still prayed and she still worshiped. And so if you find yourself in anguish and your spirit is weak, this is not the time for you to stop worshiping and say, I'm going to go fix my problems and then I'll come back to church. No, don't do that. Come to church and be with us and worship with us and keep praying and keep growing spiritually. And that time of sadness and anguish, it may be present, but we can help work through it with you. Now, the second part is her petition. So they would go up to Jerusalem, or to Shiloh rather, every year for this great feast, and they would have this time of devotion to God. And in verse 8, Elkanah, her husband, says, I think probably one of the more insensitive things that a husband could ever say. He says, Hannah, why do you weep? Why do you not eat? Why is your heart grieved? Am I not better to you than 10 sons? And we chuckle because we know the likely answer, But here's a man who loves his wife and is trying to help her, but it's really the right intention but the wrong message. This is a woman who is in despair for children, and her husband cannot take that place. It says in verse 9, so Hannah arose after they finished eating and drinking in Shiloh. Now Eli, the priest, was sitting at the seat by the doorpost of the tabernacle of the Lord, and she was in bitterness of soul and prayed to the Lord and wept in anguish. And summarizing the rest of it, 3 times she calls herself the Lord's maidservant. She's very humble in her prayer. She's not arrogant about, I've been through so much, so now I get to just speak to you however I want. I've already gone through all of this. No, she's very humble. Lord, your maidservant, I need you. Lord, your maidservant, I want to do your will. And so she calls upon him, but she's praying silently. Maybe like a lot of us do at our lunch prayer, or when we're out in public, our prayer, when we're quiet. We're moving our lips, but no one can hear it. That's an appropriate way to pray. The Bible does not condemn her, but the priest does. Eli, the old priest, looks at her, and he has a duty. We got to give him some credit here. He's responsible for making sure that this area of the Lord is dedicated and holy, right? And so he sees somebody off in the corner just whisper praying, and he thinks that she's drunk. So he tells her, you need to give up your wine, woman. Stop drinking. Get out of here and clean up your life. Basically that's Jonathan's translation of what he says. And she tells him, sir, I'm not drunk, but I'm praying to the Lord. And verse 16 says, do not consider your maidservant a wicked woman, for out of the abundance of my complaint and grief, I have spoken until now. So she's very polite, but she's also firm in what she's there for. How many of you, if you were confronted with this, might say, whoops, sorry, and pivot out? You didn't want to cause a scene. You don't want to stir up. But she does stand her ground and say, I'm here for prayer. I'm not here because I'm drunk. And as a result of her explaining to him the situation, Eli blesses her. And Eli, at the end of this prayer, says, go and may the Lord do for you what you need. And that's what Hannah needed to hear. Because now she leaves, and she's no longer sad and unwilling to eat, but she's willing to participate in the rest of the feast. So, Hannah's presentation is in 19b to 28. Hannah goes home, and she's able to get pregnant. And what a joy it must be for this woman who for so long has wanted children to be pregnant with the boy. And whenever he's born, she names him Samuel. And Samuel, according to verse 20, his name is Samuel because I have asked for him from the Lord. So Samuel, the name has a phrase with it, asked from the Lord. The Lord hears me, is what Samuel means. And so in this time, there's a rejoicing. She's given a baby. She's able to nurse this child and have that very special connection. And Elkanah, her good-intentioned husband, tells her after some time, hey, it's time to go back to the festival or the feast down there, so pack up that baby and let's go. Now, Elkanah has good intentions because he knew what Hannah had asked for in her prayers. You see, Hannah had said, Lord, if you will give me a baby boy, then I will dedicate this boy to you. Now, Elkanah knew that. He knew that she was supposed to dedicate this boy to the Lord. What does it mean to dedicate? Now, here's a simple definition, but I think it will help us in our study. It just means to give of either time, effort, money, or even yourself, to give to a specific task. We devote ourselves, we dedicate ourselves to things all the time. Some of you, you told me this earlier, you got to go dedicate yourself to an essay that's due at 11:59 p.m., right? And so that means you're going to dedicate your time for the rest of the day to that. Some of you are going to dedicate yourself to mowing the yard, maybe this afternoon. You've set aside time. Some of you are going to dedicate time to your family. And you've set aside specific time, maybe some money aside, so you can go out to eat tonight. We do it all the time, but usually it's for short spurts. This dedication is a lifetime. If you give me a child, she had said, then I will dedicate him back to you for the rest of his life. Elkanah heard that. So now she has a little baby, and Elkanah says, you know what? It's time to go back. Get that baby ready to go. We got to go give him to Eli, the priest, and hand him over for that dedicated service. What does Hannah say whenever he gives this advice? Let's see, verse 22. But Hannah did not go up, for she said to her husband, not until the child is weaned. Then I will take him, that he may appear before the Lord and remain there forever. So Elkanah, her husband, said to her, do what seems best to you. Wait until you've weaned him. Only let the Lord establish his word. I think this is a really great example of a husband and wife working together. And I think it's a great example of a wife able to explain to her husband some things that he might not understand about, and yet he's still the head of the home and able to encourage her spiritually. Did y'all see what happened there? Husbands, how many of us have experience in nursing our children? None, right? That's something that is very unique between a mother and her children. And as a result of that, many times we might come in and offer some advice. Hey, why don't you try this technique? Or I Googled this, you should give that a try, right? And it's very easy for emotions to rise like, you don't know what you're talking about, So leave me alone. You can't do this. And it's easy for us to maybe get into a negative cycle of the way that we conversate about this topic or any topic. She's able to tell him not until the baby's weaned. There's no point in offering this little bitty baby to an old priest who couldn't take care of him. This baby needs to be weaned. That could be 3, 4, even maybe 5 years old, depending on how long it would take to nurse this child. So what I want you to think about is a little kindergartner getting ready to go to his first day of school. That's what she's saying. Let me raise this child so he can be self-sufficient enough that the old priest doesn't have to change his diapers, doesn't have to care for him and clean him in that way. And Elkanah goes, you know what? That seems like a good idea. Just make sure that you do what you've asked or what the Lord asked you to do. So he hears his wife, listens to her advice, but also charges her to remember her spiritual vow. You've said that you would dedicate this child to the Lord. Make sure that you do that. They're working together as husband and wife. So after Samuel is weaned, she does take him to that old priest, Eli. And she's able to present him to that priest. And I want you to read with me. I think this is probably the most powerful part of our reading. It's 1 Samuel chapter 1, verse 26. And she said, "O my Lord, as your soul lives, my Lord, I'm the woman who stood by you praying to the Lord." She's saying, I'm the one that you rebuked. You thought I was drunk. I wasn't. I prayed for this child. Here's the child. For this child I prayed, and the Lord has granted me my petition when I asked of him. Therefore, I also have lent him to the Lord. As long as he lives, he shall be lent to the Lord. And so they worshiped the Lord there. I have struggled with that verbiage for a while now because it's really hard for me to fit it into my narrative. And here's my narrative. Children are a gift from the Lord, and we give them back to the Lord. That's my narrative. But in this, the way it's worded, it's saying we're lending them to the Lord. That just doesn't make sense. It seems like we're giving them to him and we should be getting something back in return. But really, this is the truer, more accurate way of our dedication. So as you've reached the end of your dedication period, your parents are lending you out to the Lord for the rest of your life. And what they're getting back as a result of you being lent out to the Lord is the service that you're going to give to your family, to your community, to the souls that you're going to interact with. They're going to get the joy and the love and the tears of pride in seeing mature, responsible Christians take their place in the Lord's kingdom. One time I read in a magazine about a family that served in Mozambique for whatever group, I'm not sure. But they had 7 kids, and they moved there when their oldest was a little bitty baby, and they'd stayed there for 18 years. Their oldest was now 18, was fluent in the different dialects. There's so many different dialects in that area, and so their oldest had been their chief translator, but he wanted to go to school in America. And so you know what Mom and Dad did? They had 2 options. One, you're so valuable to this work, you can't go because if you leave, I don't know what we're going to do. The other one is, we're not sure what's going to happen, but we have dedicated you to the Lord and we will bless you on your journey. And they let him go. And they talk about by letting him go, he was now in his 30s, by him having that experience of being let go and lent out, he now was married and had children, was living in Germany somewhere and had a ministry that was affecting thousands of people. They couldn't see that. And sometimes with our kids, I'm guilty as a dad, it's so easy for us to think, God gave me these and I'm just going to hoard them. They're mine. And these little souls are just going to stay little and I will enjoy them for what they are and then I'll die. That's what's going to happen. But we've been called, parents, grandparents, we've been given gifts from the Lord, because that is what they are. But the charge is that we will dedicate them, and it's going to take a process, but then we're going to lend them out for His service, for His glory, so that we might reap back reward, not necessarily of grandkids, that's not what I'm saying, but the reward of righteousness. Knowing that now we have out there productive, mature, healthy, next generation of the church, so that we can be at peace, knowing that we're better then than we are right now. Are we working towards that? Are we working towards that as families, so that in 20 years from now, Valley Parkway is going to be that much stronger, that much healthier and more mature because our families have devoted themselves to the Lord? I hope so. Chapter 2, very quickly. Hannah prays for 10 verses. This is a long prayer. And how in the world did she get to pray so long in the Bible? What did she do? She dedicated her child to the Lord. And so the Holy Spirit and the scribe who put this down, for one reason or another, and I wish I knew how the Holy Spirit worked in these situations. I don't. But this is worthy to be put in the Bible, this woman's prayer. Verse 1. Hannah prayed and said, "My heart rejoices in the Lord. My horn is exalted in the Lord. I smile at my enemies because I rejoice in your salvation." This is a woman thanking God as she's handed over her child at age 3, 4, 5, 6 to live with somebody else. And now she's going home without a kid, is still able to say, "I'm going to smile at my enemies. I'm going to be so thankful because the Lord gave me that little baby." She continues to praise and praise and praise. And I want you to look at verse 10. "The adversaries of the Lord shall be broken in pieces. From heaven he will thunder against them, and the Lord will judge the ends of the earth. He will give strength to his king and exalt the horn of his anointed." At least, Hannah is predicting. At most, she's prophesying. And scholars suggest that Hannah, in some form or another, is talking about Jesus Christ, the coming Messiah. So here's a woman who was barren, who prayed to the Lord, was given a child, dedicated the child to the Lord, has no idea where he's going to go in life, just knowing that this is what I've pledged, this is what I'll do. And now the Lord honors her with getting this prayer in the Bible where she's now predicting the Son of God coming in his glory as the anointed of God. Now, the final section that I'll be reading from is chapter 2, verse 18 through 21. I'll just read it to you. It says, "But Samuel ministered before the Lord even as a child, wearing a linen ephod. Moreover, his mother used to make him a little robe and bring it to him year by year when she came up with her husband to offer the yearly sacrifice." I can't help but imagine what it's like at month 11 when his little ephod is super short, and so she's going to bring him one that's about 3 sizes too big. So then in month 1, he's dragging it all over the floor, but by the end of that year, again, it's really short. That's just how kids grow. And so every year she's dedicated in giving him this garment. Verse 20, and Eli would bless Elkanah and his wife and say, the Lord give you descendants from this woman for the loan that was given to the Lord. There's that phrase again. That she lent her child. And now the priest is saying, you loaned your child to the Lord. Then they would go on their way home, and the Lord visited Hannah so that she conceived and bore 3 sons and 2 daughters. And meanwhile, the child Samuel grew before the Lord. You know, she didn't just give her child to the priest and then never interacted with him again. Rather, she will spend time with him and be a part of Samuel's life for years to come. And I think that's the difference between her and Samuel himself. Now, I don't want to end it in tragedy, but I want to compare the way that Hannah raised her son and the way that Samuel raised his. Now, in 1 Samuel chapter 7, at the very end, it talks about how Samuel, he's the chief judge, he's the chief prophet, and he goes on a circuit, and he's spending all his time away from his family. I want you to hear that. That he did good work away from his family. And as a result of Samuel being away from his family, this is what happened to his boys. In 1 Samuel 8, verse 1, now it came to pass when Samuel was old that he made his sons judges over Israel. And the name of his firstborn was Joel, and the name of his second was Abijah. They were judges in Beersheba, but his sons did not walk in his ways, and they turned aside after dishonest gain, took bribes, and perverted justice. And Samuel was unable to see that. And it took the elders coming to him and saying, Samuel, we don't want your boys to be judges because they're not like you. And it stings. It stings him so much that he's really resistant to the idea of getting a king put in power. He has to come around to it eventually. But Samuel did not raise his children properly because he's out judging the whole time. Whereas Hannah, even though she didn't spend every day with Samuel, she made sure to spend time with him annually. She brings him his new garments, and she's dedicated his life to the Lord. And so I'd like to end by asking, what can we learn? And I just have 2 points to make before we offer the gospel invitation. The first one is this, that children are a gift, and a gift that must be dedicated. In the same way that God gives us, I'm going to make the comparison. In the same way that God gives us money, and we're on the first day of the week, we give back as we've prospered. We're supposed to give from our first fruits. God has given children to many families. And the challenge for us as parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, and for this congregation is to look at our children and say, you are to be dedicated to the Lord, and I will help you do that. How do we dedicate a newborn? Some groups say we need to baptize them. That's not biblical, but that's their way of getting started. How do we dedicate a 5-year-old? How do we dedicate a teenager? How do you dedicate someone who turns 21? It's a whole nother lesson. And I know several moms and dads out there who have gone through this where you've had to dedicate at different ages. And all I'll suggest is this. May we not treat our children who are at the cusp of being adults with the same spiritual concern that we would treat little ones. You're almost there, and we should be helping you get out the door, so to speak. Whereas this group might need additional training at their level. Look to the level of your kids and train them. Number 2, how do we model this dedication to our children? I think the most important thing that a family can do is to model the love between a husband and wife. And if you can model the love between you and your wife or you and your husband, if your kids can see that above everything else, then that safe environment is going to give them the emotional, behavioral, psychological, and spiritual growth potential. I don't do everything right. I don't. I feel there's many places that I fail more than I succeed. But one of the things that I love about Marissa and our kids is that whenever I show her affection, You know, usually there's the no whenever dad kisses mom or dad hugs mom. But for some reason, after there's the initial gross out, there's also some magnetic charge that seems to bring them in. And suddenly one is hugging a leg and the other's hugging around the waist. And somebody's in the middle and it turns into a big group hug when all I wanted to do was hug my wife. So love your husband, love your wife, and let your children see that. Ephesians 5, verse 22 through 25 is a great scripture. 1 Thessalonians 4, verse 11. Do your job and let your children see that. Let your children see that you're faithful to the job that you do, whether you work outside the home or whether you work in the home. Let your children see that you're faithful to the things that you do. And finally, Galatians chapter 2, verse 20. Be faithful to the Lord yourself. Because if you're only faithful to the Lord here, that's 6 days out of the week that your kids get to see you living a different way. But it's not about you. You've been crucified with Christ. So it's no longer you who lives, but it's Christ who lives in you. So mom and dad, every day is a day to live a crucified life where they're seeing Jesus in you so that you can dedicate them to Jesus. Thank you. That's our study this afternoon. We never want to close without a gospel invitation. And so if anyone would like to become a Christian or would like the prayers of the church, we invite you to come as we stand and sing a song.